Thanks everyone for joining. My name is Matthew Knight and I'm a member of ARENA's Business Development Transactions team, presenting to you from the currently rainy country of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, what we now call Sydney. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands on which we meet and pay our respects to their elders past and present. We extend our respect to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. Some housekeeping before we kick off. You'll see a link in the chat to a Slido page, or you can use the QR code on screen. Please feel free to pop any questions you may have into the Slido Q&A there, and the team will note them in the background as we go to answer them in the Q&A session at the end. If we receive a lot of questions today, we'll collate them to inform a frequently asked questions document, which we'll post to the website. If we don't get to your question, please feel free to also reach out via email. We'll put those details up at the end. As I said, my name is Matt, and I'm joined by our CEO, Darren Miller, and my colleagues, Dan Starrick, a director in the Business Development Transactions team, overseeing solar investments, amongst other things, Alicia Cantello from our strategy practice, and Tom, Alex, Aidan, James, and myself working with Dan in BDT. While we've booked 1.5 hours today, we hope to use a good portion of this time for Q&A. We're targeting 30 to 40 minutes of ARENA presented to you, and we'll cover some background about ARENA and solar PV manufacturing, an overview of the Sunshot program and the proposed structure. We'll outline the key design questions where we're seeking industry input, and then we'll wrap up with links, dates, and next steps. And at the end, there'll be time for Q&A. Before I get into the agenda, one final piece of housekeeping is to encourage you to pull up the consultation paper and follow along as we talk through the webinar, and to consider please providing feedback on the paper. ARENA published a consultation paper on Tuesday, 23rd of April. You can access this paper and more information about the program using the QR code on the screen, or by visiting arena.gov.au/funding/solar-sunshot, the link you can see there on the screen. If you haven't already seen the paper, I highly recommend that you have a read of this after the webinar, and hopefully it answers a few of your questions. ARENA is seeking detailed written responses to this consultation paper. You'll see on the ARENA Sunshot webpage that there are 2 forms. One, to submit your response to the questions on our proposed program design, and a second form seeking information on prospective projects under development or project concepts that you think might fit under the Solar Sunshot program. This information will enable ARENA and government to better understand overall readiness and appetite of the market to develop projects in different areas of the supply chain, and will be used by ARENA to inform our design of the program. I'll now pass to our CEO, Darren Miller, to take you through a little bit about ARENA as an organisation. Darren?
Thanks, Matt, and hi, everybody. And I just wanted to start out by acknowledging the significant contribution by many people that you see on your screen today in the ARENA team, but as well as the people in the audience today listening in. Just looking at the names there, I recognise a number of people who've been intimately involved in the Australian solar industry for a long time, and certainly helping provide thought leadership and clarity about the opportunities in Australia. And that has led to a really exciting time for the industry and for Australia in having a look at the manufacturing opportunity for solar, which has been off the agenda for quite a while. And we're delighted at ARENA to be given the responsibility, along with the Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water, in looking at the consultation design phase, and for ARENA to be the delivery agency for this very important program. So I'm just going to spend a few minutes giving you a bit of an overview of ARENA and the way we work, and a very high-level introduction to the Solar Sunshots program. And then I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Dan, who's going to take us through more detail for the rest of the session. So what is ARENA? ARENA is Australia's Renewable Energy Innovation Agency. We were established by the then Labor government back in 2012. So we've been in operation now for almost 12 years. Our purpose is the same as it always was, which is to improve the competitiveness of renewable energy technologies, and ultimately to increase the supply of renewable energy in Australia. And more recently, as of a couple of years ago, an added objective to facilitate the achievement of Australia's greenhouse gas emissions targets, which we know are a 43% reduction by 2030 and net zero by 2050. How does ARENA do this? We achieve our purpose by two primary ways. Firstly, by providing financial assistance, typically in the form of grants, to innovative projects right throughout Australia. And secondly, and no less importantly, we perform our function by providing significant knowledge sharing activities from our funded projects to help the industry learn from each other and from project experience. And in effect, we consider knowledge sharing to be the return on investment that the Australian taxpayer gets from the funding that ARENA provides. So just taking a look at ARENA's historical project commitments, as you can see from the chart, we've committed over $2.4 billion to almost 700 projects right throughout Australia, throughout a whole variety of technologies. Our most significant technology set, as you can see, is solar PV itself, which has largely been around the research and development phase with our long-term support for programs like ACAP, the Australian Centre for Advanced Photovoltaics, many R&D projects, and then significant investment over time in project development. So we're probably most famously known for the large-scale solar funding round back in 2016-17 that saw 12 of Australia's very first large-scale solar farms being constructed in a reverse auction process, which ARENA and the CFC came together to roll out. You can see that every dollar of ARENA grant funding has attracted almost $3.50 of third-party funding, and that's a very important feature of the way ARENA works. The grants that ARENA provides are never 100% of the project, and very rarely more than 50% of the funding for a particular project is provided by ARENA. We're very much looking for co-commitment from the industry to invest alongside the grant funding that we provide so that everybody has skin in the game and is dedicated to the thing that we're trying to prove having a great chance of success. We've been involved in a range of technologies over time, as I said, most notably the large-scale solar PV industry, but more recently in things like large-scale batteries, electric vehicle charging, industrial transformation, community batteries, microgrids, green hydrogen, the list goes on. The whole spectrum of emissions reduction from an energy lens mainly is what's in ARENA's mandate. Turning to where we are focused, what you can see is where ARENA is prioritising its work, and the Solar Sunshot program most closely aligns with our work in optimising the transition to renewable electricity. In fact, since the launch of our investment plan back in 2021, we've had a very specific focus on supporting the goal of ultra-low-cost solar in Australia. We're aiming for a step change increase in cell and module efficiencies up from today's commercially available modules, which are around 22.5% efficient. We're aiming for 30% module efficiency by 2030. We're also aiming to reduce the cost of installing solar at a large scale. So we think that rule of thumb, it costs about $1 per watt to fully install a solar farm today at a sort of 100 megawatt plus scale, and we're seeking to reduce that by 2/3 or more down to 30 cents a watt of fully installed solar by 2030. So this is our Solar 30-30-30 goal that we've set, and we've got very many initiatives in train to have that play out, not least of which a solar lab next week, which is aiming to try and innovate the way we install solar in the field to achieve the 30-cent cost target that we've set. Very importantly, we also see a huge goal at installing up to 1 terawatt or more of solar by 2050 in Australia. And at some point, that's going to require us to be running at about 50 gigawatts of installation per year, which is about 10 times more than we're doing in Australia today. We see a very strong future for Australia as a renewable energy superpower, and solar PV will underpin that superpower ambition. But a critical piece to ensure a smooth energy transition and realise the superpower ambition is our ability to continue to secure a supply of high quality, low cost modules and related technologies over the years and decades ahead. And I guess that's from a one perspective, that's where Solar Sunshot comes in. It's about giving Australia the opportunity to participate more meaningfully in the solar supply chain so that not only can we add value through our significant R&D and the skills we've got in Australia, but also ensure that Australia has available to it the supply that it needs of the modules that it's going to require to deliver on the superpower ambition. And so the Solar Sunshot program is addressing this risk and opportunity by supporting local manufacturing capabilities. So let's have a look at Sunshot at a very high level. We're going to share with you a little bit about the budget measure and our views on some of the opportunities for this program, and ask you very kindly to give us feedback to help inform the development of the funding guidelines. We've published the consultation paper, as Matt noted, and provided a feedback form to formally receive your input. And I very much encourage you to share your views with us so that we have the best possible view of the market status and your ambitions. I'll caveat the following slides by saying that all information in this presentation is designed to elicit your feedback and inform the design of the round, subject obviously to ARENA's usual approvals. Any program design information should be taken as not yet finalised and open for discussion and feedback, and we welcome that. Additionally, if you've not dealt with ARENA before and are interested to see in detail how we typically structure funding programs and rounds, I recommend that you take a look at our Advancing Renewables program, or ARP, which is our main funding program, and you can find this on our website through the links that the team will provide. So let's talk about Sunshot. On the 28th of March this year, the Australian government announced up to $1 billion available of funding for the Solar Sunshot program to build Australia's solar PV manufacturing capabilities. We know that Australia has the opportunity to build high quality products across the solar PV supply chain. And as I said, while we have a very small production capability today, we have long-standing technical knowledge, skills, and partnerships to establish a strong base that can be built on over the next decade. The Solar Sunshot budget measure is a commitment to building Australia's solar PV manufacturing capabilities, and we're seeking feedback on what Australia's solar manufacturing could look like, and I suspect we'll get many different perspectives today and in the weeks ahead. The task is essentially to explore what parts of the value chain have the greatest potential for Australia and where Australia could ultimately become more self-sufficient in parts of that supply chain. We're going to look at the whole supply chain, starting right at the earliest stages from metallurgical silicon even to polysilicon, ingots, wafers, cells, module assembly, and related components like aluminium framing, solar glass, advanced deployment technologies, and other elements of solar innovation. I should note that a key piece of work underpinning the Solar Sunshot program has been the Silicon to Solar study. This report was undertaken and put together by the APVI, the Australian Photovoltaics Institute, with funding from ARENA, and we very much appreciate the significant work undertaken by the team at the APVI and related advisors. The report examined the solar supply chain, the opportunities, challenges in each step for Australia, and the support that would be required to have a commercially viable and realistic opportunity there. The report included a thorough techno-economic analysis, setting out the modelling of Australia's conditions and looking at that relative to overseas. And this report can be found on ARENA's website. We'll also provide a link to you at the end. And you should know that this report has very much guided our thinking and ambitions in this area. So with that in mind, let me hand over to my colleague Dan Sturrock, who'll take us through another level of detail. So over to you, Dan. Thanks.
Thanks, Darren. The structure of the program needs to link to the program objectives. At the highest level, Solar Sunshot aims to establish a solar PV manufacturing supply chain in Australia. This requires a step-by-step approach to build up stages of the supply chain over many years, noting that some stages will involve much longer lead times to construction and then production. ARENA's process starts by establishing a set of overarching program guidelines. Specific funding rounds can be run under these overarching guidelines to support a range of different projects. Each funding round will call for a specific set of proposals. This will allow ARENA to respond to market readiness and focus funding on the areas that need it most. Funding rounds can be either competitive or non-competitive. A competitive round is where all proposals are ranked against each other and only the highest ranked proposals are selected for funding. We propose 2 initial rounds, with subsequent rounds to be considered in response to market feedback and as the program evolves. We propose that round 1 focus on manufacturing solar PV modules, and round 2 would cover the balance of the supply chain. The focus of round 1 on modules is proposed for 3 reasons: the shorter lead time to establish module manufacturing, the relatively lower cost and complexity of establishing modules, and the opportunity for module manufacturing to create demand for other steps in the supply chain. Round 1 is expected to open for applications in August this year. Round 2 is proposed to be broad and complementary to Round 1. Round 2 is proposed to be flexible to support feed and feasibility studies, as well as potentially multi-stage projects that are complementary to Round 1. The consultation paper notes that a variety of funding mechanisms could be relevant to Round 2. For both rounds, ARENA expects to cap the funding amount available to any single project to ensure a range of projects can be supported across the program. We welcome the market's response during the consultation period to understand what types of projects could be eligible for funding in Round 2. Consultation is considering both rounds, so please provide feedback on the consultation paper through the links provided. Okay, so this slide states the program's high-level objectives. Firstly, to commercialise Australian solar PV innovations domestically to grow and diversify our economy. This objective recognises that many of the key innovations in the global solar PV sector were developed within Australian universities. Despite leading in R&D, Australia has struggled to commercialise local innovation in solar PV. Sunshot provides the opportunity to change that. And the second objective, to enhance Australian solar manufacturing capacity to build sovereign capability over a critical supply chain in the long term. With solar PV likely to form the core of our generation mix in Australia out to 2050, it's critical that we ensure our solar PV supply chain is resilient in order to de-risk the transformation of the energy sector and Australia's renewable energy superpower vision. Now I'll take you through some key details of Round 1. In Round 1, we expect to provide funding to support module manufacturing facilities, which should support the round objectives. For Round 1, we have proposed 4 objectives, and we are seeking stakeholder feedback on each of these. You can see each of these objectives listed on this slide. The next slide highlights some key elements of the Round 1 process. Applicants and submitted projects must satisfy several eligibility criteria. The focus here is to ensure participation from Australian entities and to ensure that benefits flow to the Australian market. Also, we define modules as using commercially proven technologies. Other ARENA funding programs have the capacity to support emerging technologies. On application process. As mentioned previously, we are looking at a single stage for Round 1, so just a full application. We are proposing a competitive process where applicants will bid for a production credit, price and volume. We propose that successful projects be required to submit a bid bond. This bond would be forfeited to ARENA if the project does not proceed within a certain time frame. This slide sets out the proposed application process in more detail. For anyone not familiar with ARENA programs, we typically run a 2-stage application process with expression of interest followed by a full application stage. For Round 1, as I said before, we're proposing a single-stage process with a registration of interest prior to a full application for funding. The registration of interest requires applicants to provide a summary of their project. We anticipate that we'd ask for this in September. This is not assessed, but provides useful information to ARENA to prepare for the evaluation phase. Applicants will then submit a full application in early November 2024. Round 1 is proposed to be competitive, as I said. This means that ARENA would have limited scope to collaborate with applicants, and applications are assessed against the merit criteria and then ranked against one another. After assessment outcomes are finalised, ARENA will recommend one or more projects to the ARENA board for approval of funding. Once projects are approved by ARENA and then the Minister for projects over $50 million, ARENA will commence grant funding negotiations. I'll now hand over to Tom to take you through the eligibility and merit criteria for Round 1 and then discuss our thinking on Round 2. Tom.
Thanks, Dan. So yeah, now I'm going to get into the details of the proposed merit and eligibility criteria for round one, but it's worth noting that the overall structure of this information is relatively common across ARENA programs, and you can also consider this in a general sense for what might be required for round two. So the ARENA assessment process is comprised of two types of criteria: eligibility and merit. Eligibility criteria are the mandatory requirements for a project to be considered. If these aren't met, the application won't proceed on to a merit assessment. The merit criteria consider the advantages and value of the project on a quantitative and qualitative basis. As a general rule, ARENA funding initiatives have 5 equally weighted merit criteria, which cover a project's contribution to the objectives, the applicant, the project design, the finances, and the knowledge sharing value of the project. So let's now take a look at the merit criteria in more detail. As mentioned by Dan earlier, round one is proposed to focus on establishing domestic manufacturing of solar PV modules. Merit criterion A considers how well a given project contributes to these round one objectives. So the first objective is to support a resilient and integrated domestic solar PV industry and build Australia's solar manufacturing capability. This objective considers the overall integrated solar manufacturing ecosystem and the extent to which a project will benefit the Australian economy through the development of a resilient domestic solar PV manufacturing capability, including by creating opportunities to integrate elements of the supply chain and leveraging innovation from research to rooftop. Our second proposed objective is to support innovation and automation in PV module manufacturing. So this relates to module manufacturing specifically and considers the extent to which a project innovates on existing PV module manufacturing techniques, inputs, deployment technologies, and products, including through the use of innovative technologies. This will also consider whether a project contributes to the commercialisation of Australian innovation and intellectual property. Thirdly, we want projects to reduce barriers to domestic solar PV module manufacturing. This objective is about the reduction or removal of barriers to module manufacturing. When we talk about barriers at ARENA, we're talking about one-off challenges or incremental improvements that, once overcome, make the path to commerciality easier for the next project. So these could include commercial barriers, regulatory, technical, social, permitting, and others. And finally, our fourth proposed objective is to enhance sustainable and competitive PV module manufacturing, having regard for long-term economic, social, and environmental sustainability. So this objective is about how we ensure that the module manufacturing is viable for the long term, considering the economics, social aspects, and environment. Projects will be assessed on how they improve the economics of module manufacturing, support community engagement and benefit to build social license, and the extent to which the project contributes to net zero transition plans in the regions in which it is located, and to improve and minimise the life cycle environmental impact of solar manufacturing. So as we've said, these are the proposed objectives, and we really encourage your feedback on them through the consultation feedback form. So merit criteria B through E focus on different aspects of the applicant and the application itself. Merit criterion B considers the capability and capacity of the applicant and any project partners to deliver the project. This is a two-part test which includes whether the applicant and project partners have relevant experience in delivering similar projects, including the technical, commercial, legal, development, and community engagement know-how, and whether the applicants and partners have the capacity, that is the staff, resources, facilities, and governance arrangements to undertake the project. Merit criterion C assesses how well designed and planned a project is. This covers a range of elements of project design, which includes development and permitting pathway and status, including environmental approvals, land access, technical design, procurement, risk management, community engagement and benefit, resourcing plans, the project schedule, and legal compliance with the ARENA funding agreement template. Merit criterion D is where we assess the financial viability, the co-funding commitment, and the size of funding required for a project. This considers, is the project commercially viable without ARENA funding? Is the amount of ARENA funding requested appropriate and represent value for money? How well evidenced are budget and financial model assumptions, including assumed revenues? And who is funding the project? What's their capacity and commitment? And what returns are they making? And merit criterion E assesses the value of knowledge generated by the project in contributing to the objectives. It considers how well this knowledge is targeted to specific audiences, how the knowledge will be collected and shared, and the value of the knowledge information. So I'll now move to the documents that we're suggesting applicants provide and prepare in order to demonstrate merit against these criteria. So as Dan mentioned, we're proposing a single stage process for round one. This would involve applicants registering interest before they submit their full applications. The purpose of the registration of interest is to provide ARENA visibility of the applications that are coming down the pipeline and to help plan resources accordingly. This will not be merit assessed. However, we expect that the submission of a registration of interest would be mandatory prior to submitting a full application. Only high-level details about the project will be required to be shared, and we expect that this will be in a template provided by ARENA, which would include a description of the project and its current development status, the finances and estimated support required, project partners, community engagement, and whether the applicant has broader solar manufacturing ambitions beyond just module manufacturing. On the right-hand side, we have the minimum mandatory information that we are proposing for the full application. Given that this would be a one-stage process, the expectation is that these documents would be well advanced. So the project plan is the primary document that contains all project information not covered by one of the other attachments. Much of merit criteria B and C assessment is based on this document. Complementing this, the risk management plan, community engagement and benefit plan, and recruitment plan will include remaining information to be assessed under criteria B and C. The financial model and budget are the key documents for the assessment of merit criterion D. We'll be looking for a dynamic financial model that can be sensitized and includes evidence of assumptions, cost of production, module pricing, production credit value, and the financial returns to the applicant, project partners, and investors. We're proposing to prepare a knowledge sharing plan template that applicants will use as the base document for their knowledge sharing information. This will be the primary form of information assessed under merit criterion E. And apart from that, there will be a statement of compliance with the rounds funding agreement template, and applicants can share additional information such as letters of support. And again, I'd just like to highlight that under a one-stage process as proposed, it is expected that these documents would be well advanced, as ARENA will not have the opportunity to provide feedback on drafts. Okay, and now for a brief overview of round two and any subsequent rounds. So we understand, based on the silicon to solar work, that module manufacturing is the so-called low-hanging fruit with relatively simple technology and relatively low upfront capital compared to some of the other stages of the solar supply chain. With round two, and perhaps any subsequent rounds, we want to understand the priority areas that the market is looking at and how ready the market is to move. As a reminder, the program could potentially support polysilicon, ingots and wafers, solar cells, module components such as glass and aluminium frames, other solar innovation such as in deployment technologies or inverters, and end-of-life treatment. So we're seeking stakeholder feedback to inform the design of subsequent rounds, including the timing of projects and also of feasibility studies and front-end engineering design work, which will help inform if we should have multiple additional rounds and when they should launch. We're looking for which aspects of the supply chain have domestic interest and potential, the forms of support needed, which may include production credits and capital grants, and the volume of interest, which will help ARENA determine if an open collaborative approach or a competitive ranked approach would be more suitable. We also want to note that if you have a project that seeks to trial or develop early stage technology in Australia rather than manufacture it at scale, or your technology would require demonstration before proceeding to manufacturing, our existing Advancing Renewables program is open to projects that align with our investment priorities. So in addition to responding to the consultation paper feedback form, we encourage you to fill out the project details feedback form available on the webpage for any projects that you're currently developing, both for modules, but also for projects in other stages of the supply chain. So that's it for an overview of the proposed program structure. Alicia is now going to take you through some of the key design questions that we're thinking about and would like your feedback on.
Thanks, Tom, and hi, everyone. So we have a very long list of questions in our consultation paper that we're really keen for your views on. We won't have time to go through all of them today, but we thought we'd do a quick summary of some of the key questions for you to take away and start to think through. So as Dan and Tom both mentioned, one of the main objectives of the program is what we're terming a resilient and integrated supply chain. So we're aware that we have a set amount of money to allocate through the program, and we also recognise that the scope of the supply chain and all of its inputs is quite broad. So we want to make sure that we're focusing our efforts on the right things. So we want to think about things like where in the supply chain Australia could actually have an advantage in the long term, and also where the projects could ultimately be self-sustaining. And we also want to make sure that we progress these things in the right order by making sure that we consider, first of all, any dependencies there might be across the supply chain, but also where there might be opportunities for vertical integration. So we'd really like your views on a few different questions, including stepping back, just which parts of the supply chain we should prioritise and why, which parts of the supply chain should be progressed in parallel to each other, and also how the design and the timing of the rounds can best support any vertically integrated projects. And related to the questions on the last slide, another focus of the program is phasing projects appropriately based on how ready they are to go, and also accelerating the more advanced projects wherever we can. So our timeline to opening each of the rounds is partly driven by ARENA having enough time to design the guidelines and also go through the process of legal advice and government approval, which we're setting up to do as quickly as we can. But another important consideration in round timing, both for round one and also any subsequent rounds, will be when the potential projects are ready to go. So we're seeking feedback on how the proposed program dates that we're putting forward actually align with the potential project timeline. And then the specific questions we want to test are generally how ready is the market at each stage of the supply chain. If you're a potential applicant, we'd like to understand specifically how advanced is your project and what your pathway to financial close looks like. And we'd also like to understand any major steps you have between now and full commercial deployment, for example, any feasibility or FEED studies that you need to do. And another objective that Dan and Tom mentioned was around setting up manufacturing that's both sustainable and competitive. So what we're trying to do through the program is really try to balance the economics of the project, but also thinking through the potential social and environmental benefits of the projects. So I'd really like your feedback on how program design can consider topics including community engagement and benefits, end-of-life panel management, and also any other environmental considerations such as whether facilities should be required to use a certain level of renewable energy inputs. We'd also like feedback on whether the program should focus on particular regions, for example, those that are impacted by the energy transition. And finally, while it's outside of ARENA's direct control, we're also interested in whether any other sustainability policies or government support could complement the program, for example, anything around supporting end-of-life management and recycling. So as Dan mentioned around the proposed funding mechanism, we're proposing that the program uses production credits as the primary mechanism, similar to the approach that we used in our Hydrogen Head Start program, which means that funding is paid to recipients based on $1 per unit, so for example, $1 per watt in modules actually produced, and applicants will bid for this credit support as part of their application. And there's plenty more detail on how this will work outlined in the consultation paper. And some of the questions we'd like feedback on include how suitable is a production credit in different parts of the supply chain, thinking about modules and also other parts of the supply chain. And also, while the majority of the funding is intended to be delivered through production credit, we'd also like to understand where there might be a need for CapEx support instead for, say, feasibility and FEED work. We'd also like views wherever possible. We recognise not everyone will have this information, but we'd love views on the range in the value of the credit that might be requested for modules or other components. And we'd also like to understand what other forms of financial support applicants might be seeking from other parts of government, for example, at the state level, as it's just useful for us to make sure that we have visibility of how our program will overlap with other support measures. And we also recognise that the delivery of this program will really need to draw on expertise and investment from other regions in areas including the actual manufacturing methods and IP, but also thinking about things such as access to equipment and input materials. So we'd really appreciate feedback on how applicants might work with international partners, whether it be as investors or suppliers or off-takers, and also what form that collaboration might take, for example, whether it's a joint venture or a consortia. And we'd also like to understand what dependencies there might be with any other countries, such as specific policy settings that the project success will be dependent on, and also any access to export markets that will be critical. So that's the whistle-stop tour of the questions in our consultation paper. We'd really encourage you to complete the feedback form to answer any of the questions where you do have views, and also share any other design considerations that we might have missed, or considerations from the design and delivery of programs in other markets as well that you think will be really helpful for us to incorporate here. And for any feedback that we can't directly implement ourselves at ARENA, for example, thinking through policy and other considerations, we're happy to pass on that feedback to DQ and other parts of government for them to consider as well. So I'll hand back to Matt now to cover next steps before we jump into Q&A.
Great. Thanks, Alicia. We'll move to any questions that have come through shortly, but now for a quick wrap up. It has been our pleasure to talk to you about Sunshot today. ARENA has been asked to manage the development of each stage of the solar PV manufacturing supply chain through the distribution of $1 billion in grant funding. We've presented some background on the funding program, as well as our proposed design to best allocate the grant funding and some major considerations we're thinking about, as Alicia just presented. The key outcome of today is not just to inform you about the program and our thinking, but to get your feedback, either through questions or through the feedback forms on the website. So please scan that QR code, have a read of the consultation paper, and submit your detailed written feedback. It will be the best outcome for everyone if we get a range of diverse views that we can incorporate into our funding program design. In terms of next steps, ARENA is busily taking on board feedback and working to design the program. We'll be taking submissions until the end of May. As you can see at the top right there, the consultation period closes 31 May. And we expect it'll be about 2 months from there to the opening of the first round and registrations of interest for applicants, pending approval of our program guidelines. If you have any further questions or problems regarding Sunshot, please send them to the email address at the bottom left, solarsunshot@arena.gov.au. Or if Solar Sunshot isn't looking like the funding round for your project, as Tom mentioned, there might still be funding available for other projects under other funding areas. Please contact the email address at the bottom right there, proposals@arena.gov.au, or reach out to any of the team. All right, that covers all the content that we wanted to discuss with you. The recordings will be made available on the Sunshot website as soon as possible. We have some time to answer any questions that you may have. Please use the Slido Q&A function at the QR code on screen, to put your questions forward, and we'll do our best to answer these today. If we get a lot of questions, we'll make those common questions available via an FAQ document on the Sunshot website. Tom and Dan will be answering the questions today. Over to you guys.
Thanks, Matt. Excuse me. And thanks again to everyone who has joined us online today. So we've had a stream of questions coming in through the course of the webinar, and I encourage you now to jump into Slido and ask any other questions if you haven't already. Dan and I will do our best to answer your questions on the spot, but if our answers don't quite address the question or you'd like some further information, we encourage you to follow up with any feedback using the consultation feedback form on the webpage, or otherwise emailing the Sunshot email address. So today's Q&A session is intended to be focused on round 2, the rest of the supply chain, but feel free to ask questions about module manufacturing, and we'll get to those if we have time. So we've got a good amount of time left in the session to answer questions, but once the volume of questions starts slowing down to a bit of a trickle, we'll call it end to the webinar, and you can contact us, as we've said, through the email as needed after that. So without further ado, on to questions, and I'll kick off. So the first question here is, are there any applicants who can't apply? And I might merge this with another question we've got down as well, which is about local versus international companies. So we aren't proposing any preference or types of companies that would be eligible to apply, other than what we've set out in the eligibility criteria, which is have an Australian ABN and be registered under the Corporations Act. Beyond that, don't have any views at this stage on types of applicant or international versus local ownership. But of course, that will be merit assessed under merit criterion B, considering the capability and capacity of the applicant. Next question is, are desktop feasibility studies eligible for funding? So not under round 1, but we're interested for round 2, definitely in feasibility work and front-end engineering design work. And we're really keen to hear from the market and understand the status of different projects that might be under development, and what those early works are that are needed, and especially the timing of them, and how the relative early need of those to be able to inform a future manufacturing project. So please do give us that feedback. Question, are recycling facilities eligible for funding? So as hopefully has been clear in the presentation today, certainly considering end-of-life treatment of solar modules and different aspects of the supply chain as a consideration under the program. Also would be thinking about what already exists in the market, what else is being supported, and how ARENA can best support that. So again, please share your views on recycling and need, and how ARENA might be able to best support that. And last one from me before I might hand the mic to Dan. What happens if a project fails after it's been awarded funding? So there's a few answers to this, and it depends on the time when the project fails, but also on the project itself, and what kind of support's being offered. So under round 1, which is module manufacturing, we're proposing to use bid bonds. So that would be a sum of money held in security by ARENA, and if an awarded project it ended up not reaching execution of a contract, or it didn't reach financial close, that value would be kept by ARENA, and that would be a genuine estimate of the cost that it would take ARENA to redo the process and choose another applicant. For other projects or for capital grants, perhaps, it really depends. Depending when the project failed, I guess, it could be a case that sort of everyone walks away, and that's the end of it. ARENA also has repayment rights under the contract. So few different conditions there to consider. Dan, might throw to you.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. That was a tricky one there. So well done. I've got a few. I'll start off with an easy one. When do projects need to reach an investment decision or financial close? Well, that's very much dependent on the project and whether it's in round 1 or round 2. In round 1, we're proposing some sort of I guess some indicative deadline for that, which we've suggested is November 2025. In round 2, it will be very much case by case and dependent on how we structure round 2 and subsequent rounds. The next question: what if my project is targeting multiple stages of the supply chain, such as producing ingots all the way up to modules? That's a very interesting question, and one that we are interested in sort of tackling in terms of how we design the program. We do want to allow obviously integrated projects to proceed. In designing or proposing a round 1 focus on modules, it does raise a question about how that would intersect or work with a project that was or a proponent looking to develop, say, cells. On one level, if round 2 or a subsequent round allowed support for a cell line, you could see how those 2 things could integrate, but it's not clear necessarily that they would perfectly integrate. So we're very interested in hearing from proponents looking at that sort of project on how they would navigate that, or how they would propose that ARENA design a program to facilitate that. So that's a difficult one. The next one: if opening round 1 is because module manufacturing is simpler and faster, will ARENA consider opening concurrent rounds for projects ready to go? So that's possibly related, and we are looking to open round 2 very closely in terms of timing with round 1. Obviously, not yet clear exactly what will be the parameters of round 2, but we've said looking to be quite broad and looking to certainly design round 2 to facilitate concurrent development of other projects. So certainly open to that and looking to move quickly on round 2. And finally, there's a question around solar hybrid PVT solutions. I think that's thermal solutions. And a question whether they would be considered potentially as a balance of plant component. I guess we're not that familiar with exactly what's proposed there. So for those sorts of questions, I think we're looking for more detail via written submissions and explaining what exactly is proposed, and then we can provide, I guess, further guidance and consideration of how round 2 or subsequent rounds may pick up those sorts of those technologies, I guess, that might be not a standard module, but something sort of broadly within the scope potentially of the program. So I might hand back to Tom for a few more now.
Thanks, Dan. Okay, so we're at the top list. So first question here is: will contributions to Australian intellectual property be a consideration in any part of the merit criteria? So as we said, one of the objectives for round 1 we're proposing does include consideration of whether the project would contribute to commercialisation of Australian innovation and IP. So as part of a project that's producing modules or something else, that would be a consideration under Merit A for sure. As a standalone undertaking of, say, research or something else that's producing IP, probably better aligned with our other Advancing Renewables program than this production-focused program. Next question. Okay. Can projects with no cash support, i.e. startup companies or university spin-off companies, apply? So provided you've got an ABN and incorporated under the Corporations Act, yes. In this case, I would be thinking about the capability and capacity, and especially the financial capacity of such a company, depending which type of project you're looking to do. If you're setting up a facility that's in the tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, not clear how that would be financed, obviously through partners, but that would go to the merit criterion B, is what we'd be considering about that. So in these situations, a joint venture, a partnership, a consortium, not just for financial and startup, but bringing together different skills into an overall consortium can be a way to manage this. So in round one, production credits will be paid for each watt of solar PV module produced. How would production credits work for elements such as aluminium framing? Good question. So we're not, while overall we expect that the program is the major form of funding is going to be production credits. That's not to say that everything will be, and we're really keen on that feedback from the market of whether, grants for upfront capital grants for the establishment of facilities is more useful, whether production credits are more useful. I'm not deeply familiar with the challenges in the aluminium framing sector, but certainly welcome your views and what be the best form of support that your project would require. Question, how long established does the ABN need to be? Don't really have a view on this, and it's often the case that SPVs or project codes are set up for projects, and that would be a brand new ABN. We'd be looking more at how long established the actual entity, the company is, and the people involved with it, and what their experience. The ABN itself, not particularly important. Okay, Australia doesn't have an accredited solar module testing lab. Would round two be considering supporting a local testing lab for Australia? Interesting question. So certainly we're expecting under round one, the modules that are produced are certified to the relevant international standards, that they would be certified locally for enrolment in schemes like the STC scheme. And we have heard views in the market, not just relating to this program and the volume of modules that it might produce, but the overall ambition of Australian solar and the scale up that we think is going to happen could benefit or may need a local testing capacity. So again, please fill out the form and tell us about this, and particularly if you're developing a project or work with a company that might be working on this. Might do one more and then hand back to Dan. So how would the production credit mechanism work if the applicant is at the FEED stage or at the feasibility stage? Yeah, so we're not proposing production credits for study work. That's in most cases a grant that we provide, a capital grant with milestones based on work completed. So if that doesn't work for anyone, please give us that feedback, but otherwise we'd be assuming those are grants.
Okay, thanks, Tom. So got a couple of questions relating to inverters. One of them reads, does the scope of round two encompass multi-mode battery inverters? I think on the subject of inverters, we're very interested to get some good quality submissions back through the consultation form. We certainly haven't thought in detail about the opportunities to support inverters within the scope. I think obviously it was mentioned as a potential technology within scope, but really something that we welcome feedback on in terms of how does that align with the overall objectives of the program, what would be involved, what would a project look like. It would really be very valuable to get that sort of feedback. The next question, what's the potential for startups in round one and two, or is ARENA preferring only the experienced players? This really relates, I guess, very much to broadly ARENA working with startups, and in some areas we absolutely see startups as a key part of the ecosystem around innovation and new technology. In this area where we're looking at manufacturing, there's obviously a role for startups, but really it depends on what is the project, and does that startup have the capability together with its partners to deliver the project. So very, very much case by case. So apologies if that's not a particularly specific response. The next one, when and will ARENA make the responses submissions public? We're not looking to make the submissions public. We obviously there's could be sensitive information in the submissions. We will consider potentially producing some sort of public communication that might provide some summary of key themes, something that I think we're just considering. So again, sorry for not being able to be definitive there, but certainly not looking to publicly publish all of these submissions. That would, I think, discourage people from making submissions. And I'll do one more, which is an interesting one. Would a technology that retrofits existing solar panels to enhance their efficiency be eligible under the program? My initial response there would be probably not. I think it's interesting, the question, technology. So, I'm not sure what we'd be investing in there, but that's not to say that ARENA wouldn't be interested in that. And it does sound like the sort of thing that possibly fits better into our existing programs under the Advancing Renewables program, where we're very interested in supporting, novel technologies that can ultimately help reduce the cost of solar, as Darren said at the start of the presentation. So, to the extent that there's, really interesting technologies out there that don't necessarily fit well within Sunshot, certainly worth engaging with ARENA more broadly, because we're very focused on, as Darren said, ultra low cost solar as a key priority. So anything that aligns with that objective is, we've got an open door policy. Tom, back to you.
Thank you. Just noting, I guess the flow of questions is starting to slow down. So quite a few still here to read, but get those last questions in if you've got them, as we may be drawing to the end soon. So what is the timeline and budget for projects in round 2? Great question. Please tell us. So a couple of things we're thinking about is particularly the feasibility and feed work, when that would need to be started. Is that later this year? Does that need to be separated from other aspects of round 2, such as other manufacturing facilities? Does the study work and the feasibility work need its own kind of dedicated funding round? And then sort of very much to be informed by this consultation process at this stage. But we think the launch of round 2 sometime later this year, once round 1 is up and running and out in the world. But really keen to get the market feedback on this one. So next question. In phase 1, would an alliance with an international partner and set up manufacturing overseas, expand the facility to Australia in subsequent phases? I'm sorry, I butchered reading that. So yeah, not supporting any facilities overseas. Facilities will have to be located in Australia. So I mean, if that other expansion happens overseas, and then those partners are looking to come to Australia, that's would be suitable for this program. But yeah, the partnership, the joint venture structure, definitely that could be something that could be considered under the program. What, if any, focus on export capabilities? Yeah, really interesting question. We are really keen to get an understanding of the market's view on what the cost of production is going to be for these different products, for modules, for polysilicon, for cells, and that will inform what production credits will look like in Australia. But also, if there are people out there that think that they could be internationally competitive and be exporting to markets. So yeah, again, please give us your feedback on that. It's something of interest to us. Another sort of question on eligible applicants. This one is, I'll generalize it, but will research institutions be excluded from rounds? Again, not excluding, it's the requirements in an ABN and incorporation under the Corporations Act. And usually that's just a matter of, if it's a consortium of different companies and organizations, choosing one that's eligible, or as I said before, setting up a new ABN or a SPV or project code to deliver the project. Keep looking down here. And I think most of them are tagged to you. I'll just do this one, and then I'll hand over to you, Dan. So to support the local value chain, is the government looking at options to levy taxes and duties on imported panels or other mechanism? So Import tariffs and things of that are far beyond Dan and Mai's understanding, so I'm not sure we'll be able to answer that very well. One of the questions in the consultation paper is what other complementary forms of support, or in this case regulation, would be appropriate, would help ARENA and sort of form a ecosystem of support. We're aware, for example, that state governments are doing, have some support programs for funding for facilities. Also interested in regulatory aspects, as Alicia mentioned, as, how that might relate to waste streams and recycling, for example. Right, Dan, I'll throw back to you.
Thanks, Tom. I'll just probably do a couple more, and I think we're probably then winding up. There's a question here around the scale on polysilicon. I said we have noted 10 gigawatts of polysilicon as minimum scale. I think that's in the Silicon to Solar report. So that's certainly out there as a sort of a reference document. And that compares to 1 gigawatt in the other areas. So the logic behind that is really just, the analysis done for that report, and that was based on consultation with a range of stakeholders. So I don't think that they're not hard numbers, but I think that was the feedback that the team from APVI got in engaging with the market, and obviously the silicon stage just has significant economies of scale, which really makes a 1 gigawatt equivalent scale very uneconomic. So that's the reason for that very big discrepancy there, and I don't think that applies to the other areas. They all seem to operate at sort of similar scales, and 1 gigawatt sort of being a minimum. Obviously noting that much larger scale plants are common in other parts of the world. Then another question: will projects that look at the whole life cycle of solar panels be looked at favourably? And then example, panels designed for longer life, repairability, reusability. I think when we're thinking about module design, certainly interested in understanding, what are the different characteristics of modules. Having said that, I think when we're thinking of round one, we're looking at, probably expecting modules to be roughly, similar and comparable and measured on a dollar per watt basis in terms of value. But we're certainly interested in people telling us, both in consultation and then obviously in submissions, why their project is different or differentiated. I think in terms of, particularly novel approaches, again, that would probably be more something that we'd want to talk to people about through the existing Advancing Renewables program, which is a program that supported projects, in the past from SunDrive and others around, novel cell design or other sort of novel technology. The Sunshot program is, largely focused on large scale, competitive products rather than, new technology. So again, encourage people to tell us what they've got in mind, but B, come and approach us directly if it's really a novel technology that you're looking at, rather than a technology that can be rolled out at scale in a manufacturing sense. I'll stop there.
Cool. All right. Yeah. Questions have really dropped off now. So I think we'll do another turn or so each, and then that will probably be it. So last chance if you've still got questions. So a question about sharing more detail and the goals about ARENA's knowledge sharing and how this might relate to IP management. So knowledge sharing is the return that ARENA gets on its investment in projects. It's a really, really critical part of what we do, and sharing the knowledge gained from projects back to the market and improving the commercialization of technologies and projects. In terms of IP management, look, it's detailed in terms of how that's managed, but it's well established. It's something we've been doing for over a decade, including for R&D funding programs for solar and for other things. There's all kinds of management processes we use about intellectual property, and it's very detailed, but it's the norm and par for the course for us. Okay, a question that I'm going to paraphrase, that it's Chinese companies dominate PV manufacturing today, and the question, I guess, is about supply chain security. Yeah, like really interesting question about, currently, at all the stages of the supply chain, the vast majority of products are produced in China. And so, conceivably, a lot of manufacturing gets stood up here, may be reliant on Chinese companies, in partnership with Chinese companies, using that expertise, that access to technology. So it's an interesting question. We certainly welcome views on it, but I think our expectation is that a lot of the leading companies today, would be interested, could be partners, could be leading projects. Okay, I think I'm just going to do one more, Dan. That's all we've got there, and then that might be it, unless you've got anything. So last one I've got here is if an ingot or wafer manufacturing facility is set up in Australia, but there are no solar cell manufacturers to buy them, how would this be managed? It's a good question. This idea of this integrated solar ecosystem of producing all the different stages of the supply chain in Australia is a really big idea and a big concept, with no limited amount of challenges. How those can be integrated, how ARENA's program, starting with modules and then considering other aspects of the supply chain, recognizing that we're a provider of financial support only, that's our main function, how we can leverage that to support integration, to support these different stages coming together, and maybe offtakes being taken from different stages, is really important to inform our design. So again, welcome all views and thoughts on that, and what we might do to make sure that the program can accommodate the integration of these different stages. So that's it for our list of questions. So we might call it there, I think. So to wrap up, thanks again for all of you for attending today's webinar, and for those of you who've stuck through all the way to the end. Just a reminder that consultation is going to be open until the 31st of May, the end of this month, and we welcome your feedback using the forms. Recordings of the webinar and the accompanying slides and an FAQ document will be uploaded to the website soon, probably in the next week or two. So without further ado, thanks very much. We look forward to hearing from you.
Thanks, everyone.